Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had time for a quick coffee afternoon pick-me-up. This is our second to last session, and my name is Eliza Gkritsi. I'm a technology reporter at POLITICO. In the last few months, it seems like every EU member state is literally fighting for its life when it comes to information and narratives online, from health hoaxes to the latest thing online, being Merz, Macron, and Starmer doing cocaine at a high-level meeting. There's so much misinformation online, it's really hard to know what's true and what's false, and I know this very well because it's my job to discern these things every day. And a lot of this can be traced back to strategic adversaries such as Russia. Regulators, policymakers, and dare I say, even big tech are trying pretty hard to fight this flood of disinformation. So what's going wrong? To discuss this, I will bring in our wonderful panel. Christel Schaldemose, she is an MEP at the European Parliament from Denmark. She worked on the DSA, she was the rapporteur. Marc Faddoul, co-founder of AI Forensics, and Anne-Sophe Dhiver, she's the deputy head of Viginum, the Vigilance and Protection Service of France against foreign digital interference. Please welcome our panelists. All right, thank you everyone for being here. So I will say we did try to have a representative of a big tech platform with us today, but due to various scheduling conflicts, we were not able to have one. I will also encourage you to tweet about this and use the correct hashtags, which I think is PoliticoAITech. And without further ado, I would like to ask, first of all, Anne-Sophe, because you're very deep in this on a day-to-day basis. What is the threat landscape right now? Like, how have things changed in the last year, and what is it that you're dealing with on the day-to-day?
Thank you, Eliza. So yes, at the moment, so I have to say that we are facing an unprecedented level of information threats. And basically, the electoral polls at the end of 2024 also marked a decisive stage, leading to a profound recomposition of the physiognomy of these threats. And basically, if I first start with the macro trends, which are really building the new face of the threat, I would describe three levels of pressure. The first level of pressure, and you described it, of course, is a strategic pressure. Because it's nothing new, and you know that perfectly, but our information digital ecosystems are the theater of heightened international rivalries. And basically, and this is a phenomenon which is accelerating since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, but basically, we are now facing and observing the advent of a new global digital conflictuality. And when it comes to Europe, this digital conflictuality takes the form of hybrid operations in the cyberspace, and the information operations are a privileged component of these hybrid operations because the barriers to entry are pretty low. And basically, these information strategies draw upon old strategic practices of subversion, and they would try to deploy increasingly sophisticated technique online to try to manipulate opinion and ultimately weaken the democratic societies. So this is the first trend. The second trend is that this strategic pressure is profoundly intertwined with another pressure, which is a systemic pressure. The systemic pressure is linked to the evolution of the digital ground itself. So, of course, we are talking about AI today. So the proliferation of open AI tools also exacerbates these threats. But not only. Also, you can see how the information digital landscape is now reshaped. And this has been seen pretty clearly during the US elections, where you can see the rise of influencers, the phenomenon of decentralization from big platforms to smaller partisan social media, and also the rise of alternative media platforms. And all these evolutions tend to blur the lines between factual information and opinion. And lastly, the last level of pressure is more a disruptive pressure, with a pressure to change and disrupt the existing. Applied to our field, this means that we are now facing a kind of break or major change in the traditional approach to fighting online disinformation. And for instance, one big trend that we're seeing is the weaponization of powerful topics like freedom of speech, which is used to do a push for deregulating the online platforms. And so, for instance, the decisions and the announcements made by some of the platforms in January to reduce their efforts in terms of moderation and fact-checking will also accelerate this level of pressure and ultimately could make our ecosystem more vulnerable. So this is just the macro trends. Now, if I'm more specific, talking about what Viginum, so our service, is observing when it comes to the threat targeting the French interests. So we had a pretty busy year over 2024 and the first months of 2025. So mostly three things. First thing is that the ongoing conflicts are a privileged theater of information operations, with impact well beyond the belligerents involved. And we've seen, for instance, as part of the Russian and conflict between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of operations trying to undermine the Western support to Ukraine and criticize also the policies of the European countries supporting Ukraine. First trend. The second big aspect of 2024, and it's more specific to France, but the French interests also have been extremely threatened in our overseas territories. And we've seen also quite aggressive actors like Azerbaijan doing strategies at the frontier between coverted and overted operations with also aggressive public diplomacy to try to undermine the sovereignty of France in these territories. And lastly, because we had two elections and we had the Olympic Games, big events like elections or sports events are also extremely attractive in terms of playgrounds for information actors.
I want to pick up on something you said, because you mentioned fact-checking.
Yes.
And when Meta rolled back its fact-checking commitments in the US, at least initially, there was quite a lot of a fuss made about this. So I wanted to point to Marc and ask you, was fact-checking the solution for all of this disinformation, or was it more of a game of whack-a-mole?
I mean, I think it's, fact-checking is an important element of like the information landscape ecosystem, which is at threat from various vantage point, fact-checkers being one of them, but also quality journalism being another important one. And also more importantly, I think, is generally what type of information do we get is being surfaced on online platforms. It's important to remember that like 90% of the content that we consume online is in fact surfaced by an algorithm. So it's really that is defining. So previously it was just Google. You go on Google and you see like what link come up, or then it was like social media recommender system recommending most of the content that people look at, and now it's ChatGPT or like different type of chatbots that do so. And so every time we defer to these AIs to kind of surface specific type of content, I think this is the main threat to our information ecosystem, is like what type of content is being surfaced and what are the optimization metrics that are being used by the system. And in a lot of cases, they are engagement driven. It's almost the only metric that is being used. And I think that's at its core, kind of the most fundamental threat that we have, is that disinformation or more polarizing content tends to be disproportionately amplified through these systems. And so then it gives a lot of work to fact checkers, because obviously they have to fight all these kind of false claims that arise and are being highly amplified. But I think that's the more fundamental issue.
The recommender systems themselves, you
Yeah.
mean? I think we've seen in Brussels, certainly in recent months, a lot of attention going towards the recommender systems themselves. But Christel, also having negotiated the DSA and now working on the European Democracy Shield, is it really possible to have substantial change to recommender systems, given that that is the most fundamental thing for a lot of these platforms?
It depends on the enforcement, because I think we have the options in the law, in the DSA. What we did with the DSA was that we made the platform responsible for, or accountable for their algorithms. So not what you and I post on social media, but how they use our posts. If there is this systemic risk for disinformation, for instance, or civic discourse, etc., then they have to risk mitigate. And there are also obligations on transparency and a lot of things. So, I mean, in the law, we could demand a lot, but, and there is a but, that in order to make sure that happens, the law must be enforced. And we gave the European Commission the obligation to enforce the DSA for the very large online platforms and search engines. And they're working on it, but it is also a huge task. So I think we will have to push them a little bit to make sure that they are doing enough. So yes, in my opinion, it is possible, but it is probably going to be a bit of a fight. So there's a lot of investigations going on right now from the European Commission side on the platforms. And well, the present political climate taken into account, I also guess that they want to be crystal clear that once they start fining platforms for not complying with the DSA, they want to make sure that it can hold in court. So it takes some time, but yes, I do believe that it is possible, but we need to use all the tools in the DSA. That also means that in order to help us, we need to use, we were talking about it just outside, we need to make sure that researchers get access to the algorithms as well to help enforcers to do the job, because we need to get into the the details of the algorithms and recommender systems in order to see how they work, and in order to be able to say and you may not and even show evidence that it is here the problem lies. But I think we need to do it. I think the DSA is maybe not perfect, but it is a very good law, and we need to use the tools inside there.
But is there political will? Is there enough political will or steam or diesel to do more than that, to go one step further than the enforcement? Or do you think the enforcement is all that we need? Like looking at the Digital Fairness Act and the Democracy Shield and so on?
I think that, well, if I should read what when I read the landscape from what I hear from the European Commission, what I hear in the member states, etc., at one hand, they believe that enforcement of the DSA and all other digital laws we have in place is very crucial in order to deliver on this. But it's also cooperation, for instance, between member states and what they are doing and what is done at EU level. But then again, it's probably also a balance, because there is no doubt that our democracy is facing threats from foreign interference, for instance. But is it so much that it really is, that the democracy is at risk? I'm not really sure we are there yet, and that's good that we are not there yet. So, I mean, maybe also the willingness to go very much further than what we see today is not there yet. We need to balance, but we need to build up a lot of things. And with the Democracy Shield, just to finalize on that, we expect that the electoral processes in the member states will be looked at in order to strengthen them, make them more resilient. We need to look into media freedom issues. How can we have true, good, independent medias that goes out to the majority of the citizens? And we need to fight disinformation, just to mention some of the things. So I mean, there's not just one task. Yeah, then of course we also need to make sure that citizens learn to be more critical about what they're reading, so that they automatically react when they see that Macron and Merz and Starmer is accused of using cocaine. Then they should of course react and say, oh, that's not true.
I want to pick up on something you said and ask Anne-Sophie, because this was also in the Democracy Shield report that the Parliament came with, where the rapporteur is the working document discusses having an EU-wide structure to coordinate everyone. And I want to ask you, Anne-Sophie, is there times in your work where you really wish, like, I really wish that the Czechs had a structure like ours, and that we had channels where we could talk, because this would have really helped us. We could have seen this way in advance. We could know these threat actors better. Are there such situations?
Yeah, so first of all, there are also already a lot of things existing at the EU level. Probably where we probably need to also improve and enhance what exists. Actually, the main principle for us, and this would be, and this is also true in the military field, but would be to enhance interoperability between the member states. And this is really a prerequisite for effective international collaboration and European collaboration in that field. Because as we mentioned, so the threats are targeting several European member states and European and Western democracies in general. And so now we are at a decisive stage where a lot of member states also are working to develop their own capacity at the national level, like France did with Viginum, for instance, or like Sweden did a few years ago. And so now we are seeing, so in terms of operating structure for the detection. And so this is extremely important to facilitate the emergence of a true European culture on the fight against foreign information manipulation and interference. Because still today, and the definition of FIMI helped, but this is not enough, because today there is still some discrepancies in terms of the definition behind it, and also the methodological approach and the conceptual approach behind this detection. So first of all, the creating a common culture and a common grammar is extremely important. Secondly, probably also to help the member states develop their own capacity. And also having interoperability in mind means probably also developing structures at the national and EU level, which would be similar in terms of organization or can be mirrored and can work easily with each other. And lastly, the last aspect is also creating a powerful network of these different national capacity with also same tools. For instance, OpenCTI, which is a tool that we are using for knowledge management on our field. This tool can be used also for data sharing between member states. So enforcing the same tools, enforcing the same practices, and unifying this methodological approach is extremely important moving forward if we want to have an effective collective response.
Right now, if you want to alert Poland or something of something that you're seeing and you think might be of interest to them, do you have to call them?
So we do have, we work both bilaterally with some of the member states, of course, and also we are working at the EU level or in different multilateral organizations. So clearly we would do both, and we would have also bilateral cooperation with some of the countries, of course, yes.
But would you, if it's an emergency, would you have to call them, or is there a platform like OpenCTI that you can use?
So in terms of an emergency, so there are currently processes in place at the EU level. So for instance, the hybrid response, rapid response team, for instance. So this is a mechanism that can be activated where other member states with operational capacity can help a member state of neighboring countries to react or work on a specific context or a specific crisis, for instance. So there are already mechanisms existing on top of potential bilateral cooperation.
From your perspective, Marc, like how important is this, like this building this capacity on the member state level, also on the civil society level, versus regulation per se? Like, let's say in a way it's being offensive versus being defensive, and so far we've been quite defensive. But should we go more on the offense and have more things like Viginum?
I mean, I think what the work that Viginum is doing is critical to the enforcement as well, because in the end it's also monitoring and detecting and measuring the level of the threat landscape and kind of what are the different risks going on. So it's very important that there is national agencies that, like Viginum, that do that. It's also important for the European Commission to develop this type of capacity. And actually, I run an organization which is called AI Forensics, which also does exactly that. We audit social media recommender systems, and we help the European Commission also enforce the DSA and kind of find this type of monitor kind of the threat landscape on algorithmic systems. So I think they go enforcement and monitoring and auditing capacity go really hand in hand, because if you don't have the auditing capacity, how can you enforce the law and how can you point out to the systemic risks that are being infringed upon? So I think that's really important. But I think it's only a first step. And by the way, another important element of the DSA, which supports this whole auditing ecosystem and approach, is the transparency requirements. And so in particular, the data access mechanisms that are one of the, I think, most successful parts of the DSA, because they have actually proven already good results in empowering civil society organizations and journalists and other actors in identifying threats that hadn't been described before, and so I think that's really good progress. But so far, you're right, we're still on the defensive. We're pointing at the problem and saying, please solve them. I think the more forward-looking approach would be to start developing a more sovereign tech stack for the European Union, and I think that right now we have actually a really good example in front of us with the emergence of Blue Sky, and more particularly the AT protocol, which is underlying Blue Sky. It's, I think, even more interesting and important than the platform itself, is that this protocol kind of shows how it's possible to build platforms that are interoperable, open, modular, and give users the choice to choose what type of recommender systems they want to use, what type of moderation, who they trust to moderate their content, so you don't have necessarily to trust a specific tech platforms to moderate your content, but you can choose a third party to do it for you, and also you have a much more control and sovereignty on your experience and your data. And so I think that the so-called more offensive, but even just like more forward-looking approach that we should take is to start requiring platforms to operate on interoperable protocols, which would also kind of enable a whole innovation ecosystem to emerge of third parties who would provide alternative recommender systems, moderations approaches, and even user experiences. So I think that would be the next step.
I saw Christel nodding there when you were talking about data access.
I did, because when we made the DMA, I was in IMCO in the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee last mandate. I also worked on the side of the DMA and listened and participated there. And it was a very crucial part of the DMA, the wish to make sure that we had interoperability in place. And that was even before we felt, the big geopolitical changes taking place, but it was an attempt to make sure that users could move away from one platform and go to another social media platform and have friends and followers, etc., to move on to the next one. And in order to make that happen, we needed interoperability. So I think we foresee what some of the problems we're now facing. It is a little tricky to get it to work precisely, but I think it is very important that we make sure that this happens. But the real push towards a wish to establish a more independent digital infrastructure in the EU is, of course, the geopolitical situation. So foreign interference, primarily, or at least to a very large extent, coming from Russia, and then this underlying threat from the United States towards us when we talk about tariffs, and is there a risk that they will close down on social media and cloud services, on AI and Microsoft Office package, et cetera, and that has, kind of created a wake-up call for us, understanding the need to be more independent. But even though we have good laws in place, it is not just something we can do overnight. It will last a long time. We need huge investments, and we need also to make sure that we have people who can invent things for us and make sure that we have, this room for development and innovation in EU. So it's a big task. But I've been a member of the Parliament, European Parliament, for almost ages, and I've never ever felt this wish and willingness to try to find solutions on this as we see in these weeks and months. So I truly believe that we will see the beginning of something, but it will last, I guess, maybe even 5 to 10 years before we can see that we become more independent, and who knows where we are in 5 or 10 years.
I think it's really interesting. Also, there is some talk about having a European social media platform, for example. But what I find a little bit scary, because this already has happened in terms of, let's say, Blue Sky exists, so there is a welcome structure for social media refugees, is that then just the world splits even more. And now if you go on various platforms, I won't name them, you see two completely versions of the world. So does that make it easier or harder for fighting misinformation? Because then we're living in literally different realities, right? Anne-Sophe, you're really agreeing with this.
Yes, of course. This is one of the aspects of what we are seeing today. So this fragmentation can also come along with fragmentation of the capacity to detect actually this operation, and this requires a more exhaustive approach, talking about our own mission, which is so we are performing online investigation using open source data to detect and characterize FIMIs. So this requires us also to have a more exhaustive approach with more platforms, with also the challenges of sometimes having access to APIs or data, and to perform this mission. So of course, this would come also with operational challenges, which requires as well to enhance our own technical capability to be able to follow these trends and be as effective as we are today.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it's not like this question of interoperability is in fact more about connecting platforms and walled gardens and kind of creating a more fragmented space. In fact, if you have different platforms who are currently not connected, operate on the same protocols, it would allow them to breach and to bridge between them. And I think, in fact, the issue to me is not about, we shouldn't be trying to censor the speech that we think we disagree with, or even to say, like, even if an information is false, from like factually false, I don't think it should necessarily be taken down. The problem is more, how is it going to spread, and to whom is it going to spread, and in which context? If people are actively seeking for that type of content, they should be able to find it. The problem is when it's being amplified by default to millions of people who didn't ask for it. And I think that's where the responsibility of the platform is involved. And I think that's also when we say trying to switch a paradigm to more open platform operating on an interoperable protocol, in the end, what is changing is the current power structure of these, which is driven by the architectural design of this platform, where all of the power regarding the content moderation, the content amplification, and the revenue sharing model is concentrated in the hands of one corporate actor, which is protecting this model through a walled garden approach. And I think that's why we want interoperability, is to basically just have a more democratic approach to this, to ruling our information landscape and ecosystem. And I think that's really what this is about.
But you said that what if we can't speak to each other any longer because we don't belong to the same platform, or that we are divided and polarized? I mean, I think that even if we made European-wide and European-based social media, that would not change that much because we are divided. We are having different interests anyway. If you look just at the European debate, of course, sometimes we have real pan-European political issues we're discussing in every member state. But very, very often they are anyway based on what is happening individually in the different member states. So, I mean, maybe us in the bubble, we kind of feel that we are speaking, talking to each other, cross-border and cross-language, etc. But for the majority of European citizens, they would not feel it like that. You know, their network is still, if they're on Instagram or Snapchat, it is their friends and close, you know, maybe school class or family, but often, very often inside the same country. So I don't see that, you know, as a big problem. What I find a big problem is if we cannot have a place where people can know whether what they see is right or not. And that is maybe one of my biggest fears when we look into the future of social media platforms. Is this, will we ever be in a situation again where we can trust each other and trust what we are reading? That is my fear, and therefore fact-checking or other programs in place to make sure that we can do something here is important. Very briefly, 6 weeks ago, I went to the United States with a mission with the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee of the European Parliament, and we met with some White House officers and talked about AI. And I asked them how they looked at it from a United States perspective. In the AI Act, we have now decided to have labels on deepfake and things like that, so we have a chance to see if what we see is AI generated or not. And I asked whether they wanted to do the same in the United States. And after, you know, talking around the topic for a while, this person told me that, well, in the end, it didn't really matter because no one trusted what politicians said anyway. So why at all label AI, etc. And that's my worst fear, is that we end up in a situation where you don't know whether you should trust what you read and see. And luckily, we're not there yet in EU, and I hope that we will not come there. We really have to fight this thing, both when AI is misused for these purposes, but also the disinformation we see from outside EU. And we need really to make sure that we have strong independent medias that can help our societies to thrive, because otherwise it will be really, really problematic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what you said about the walled gardens, Mark, is really interesting, and I don't often do this, but I will play devil's advocate on behalf of the big tech platforms. And if you work for a big tech platform and you would like to speak up, we will have time for a Q&A, so do consider asking a question. But I think they would say that, especially after the DSA, they are doing a lot to open up data for researchers, to work on illegal content, to be more transparent. So do you think they're not doing enough?
No, I think so. This is on the transparency aspect, and I think definitely the DSA has led to some great progress in this regard. I think some platforms have been doing a better job than others at opening up that data. Meta, for example, has done a really good job at opening their advertising library. So they have a very comprehensive ad library, which allows to basically scrutinize also the type of information operations that are happening, leveraging advertisement in the EU. And so, for example, we have been involved in exposing one of these information operations called Doppelganger, also with which Viginum and other civil society actors have been working on. And here we can see also that, in a way, it's double-edged for platform, because by having Meta, by having transparency standards that was higher than its peers, also exposed itself to more scrutiny. But I think it is the point of this law, and it shows also the effectiveness of the law, that these transparency mechanisms allow for actually effective scrutiny. I think now what is important is to also enforce to make other actors, for example, X has not provided a comprehensive enough library, and so it should be also the job of the enforcement to make sure everyone goes on the same standard. Now, what I was talking about in terms of interoperability is something different. It's like enabling the platform, is enabling third parties, recommender system, moderation paradigms to, or interfaces to also provide one part of the user experience. So it's enabling users to choose their recommender system. It's enabling users to choose who they trust to moderate their content. That's a completely different form of interoperability, which is beyond the transparency element, and that is not covered currently in the DSA, but hopefully a new legislative path, such as maybe the European Democracy Shield or the DFA, could also address it.
That would be a beautiful world indeed. Does anyone in the room have any questions? Oh, we have a question. If you can say your name.
Hi, thank you for this great panel discussion. I'm Alice Schwartz from the Utah AI Policy Office. Utah passed a bill on a social media platform interoperability less than a month ago, and some of the most salient backlash that we got was about privacy issues in the implementation. So basically, when all platforms are mandated to share the data in a way that you can apply a different algorithm to it, it means that they need to share a lot of user data. Is that something that you have considered as you've explored the ideas around interoperability, and how would you envision Europe to address those? Thank you.
Yeah, so if I look, for example, at how it's implemented in the context of the AT protocol, which I think currently is like kind of a leading option, technical mechanism to do that, it's actually the user that has sovereignty over its own data, not the platform. So I'm not delegating my data to Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, whoever, to then give it to the third-party recommender system, but I actually have sovereignty over where I store my own data on a server that can be that I can host myself, or someone like the social media platform who can provide a service offering to host this data. But it's really the user that has the full sovereignty about their data, and who it grants access to then reshare it on algorithmic feeds or not. So I think it would improve the kind of privacy standard and guarantees on users' behalf.
Thank you. We also have a question from the audience, which online, which I will slightly rephrase, and it's a juicy one. Is the US becoming an adversary in terms of hybrid threats, and should we include US actors when we analyze FIMI campaigns? Anne-Sophie, what are you seeing on the field?
So the point is more, I would more refer to what I was mentioning at the beginning, which is that we are seeing similar trends happening in Europe as what we are seeing in the US. So for instance, more vulnerabilities to FIMIs coming from the evolution itself of the information ecosystem with the different aspects that I mentioned, and something we saw very clearly during the US elections. And this combined with a decrease in the consumption of traditional media also would lead to a greater vulnerability. And also to some consequences of the US elections, like what I mentioned with weaponization of freedom of speech, with a definition which is extremely different from ours in Europe. And meaning, if we think about usually this concept of the marketplace of ideas, which also is linked to this conception of freedom of speech, this comes with rule. And if we want it to function correctly, this doesn't mean that everyone is allowed to say what they want, and it's not who's speaking louder than other, and not everything is allowed if we want it to this online public debate to function. So probably, yeah, this is more about the consequences on our own information ecosystem and phenomenon being accelerating since the US election, with potentially effects also in Europe.
Christel, you also, would you like to answer this question a little bit? Because you also mentioned the geopolitics quite a lot. Should we now consider the US an adversary when it comes to spreading FEMI in Europe?
Maybe not the country, but you could probably find individuals and media owners in the United States where we would have to look out for what they're doing. I'm not saying that what we see there is foreign interference, but I think that we should definitely pay attention to what happens. Okay, let me be a little bit more concrete. We need to look into what happens, for instance, on X. How is the algorithm used? I mean, having a meeting, an electoral meeting with the leader of the AfD is not at all, in my opinion, problematic. But if you use your algorithms because you own it and you prefer to help someone and it's not transparent, etc., then I think we need to look into whether that is fair, transparent, and according to the rules. So definitely we need to understand that threats against EU does not necessarily only come from Russia or China or these states that we normally see as somebody we need to pay attention to. We also need to look at individuals from the United States. That would be the most fair way to act.
Mm-hmm. And another question, which I think I will ask you for very short responses to. One person is asking, there are EU-made social media. Nobody's using them. Should we adopt the Chinese approach, which I guess means like actually banning certain social media or sort of really encouraging people to adopt them? Yes or no? Are we at that stage yet?
I think it's not the approach. I think the approach, again, interoperability, again, sorry to be, is a much better approach because it basically doesn't forbid anyone to enter the space. It actually provides a more level playing field for competitors to enter and contribute and propose better alternatives to users, and then users are free to choose. I think that we should just empower freedom of movement in this space because in a nearly monopolistic space, you don't have truly a freedom of movement in that space. Some information published by official institution is only available on X. So as a user, if I want to reach that information, I only have one choice. I have to go on X and I have to basically be fed that information through an algorithm that is in many ways biased and because Elon Musk, for example, has been red-handed amplifying its own content on the feed. And so that's something that is not providing a level playing field for information to spread.
Mm-hmm. We have European companies being able to make big platforms, also in EU. The whole porn business is primarily European-owned, and they're apparently very popular. So we have the competences to build up big platforms in EU, and I hope that we will use those for good purposes like social media that can be based on the values and the way we look at it in EU. I don't think we should ban platforms unless they're really, no, I don't think we should ban them, but I think we should build up good alternatives, and we need to make sure that those already existing are complying with our very good European laws, and in case they are not, they should be fined quite tough.
Mm-hmm. Anne-Sophie, any quick thoughts on that?
No, I think I would probably echo what you said. I think the most important thing is to ensure that platforms are accountable and would respect rules, to have a public debate which is free and transparent and when ideas can circulate freely. So it's more about making sure that we can have these safeguards in place than banning some platforms from the others.
Mm-hmm.
Except is it not follow the law, though, however, because that's part of the DSA too, is if you, after big sanctions multiple times, you still don't adapt, then you can be banned, which I think should be a last resort.
Only ultimately
exactly.
and only after very long processes and only if the court agrees or something. So it's in my opinion, not the option. I think the best option is to make sure that they are complying with the rules, and if not, they should be fined.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I agree.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. To sum up, we will not be going nuclear anytime soon on any of the big tech platforms. We have a lot of tools in our disposal, and we are hoping that they will be used well. Member states and the Commission are building up capacity and bridges to actually have the tools to deal with this problem on a day-to-day basis. And we focused a lot on recommender systems and algorithms and what can be done on that front to fight the problem at its root, which in my opinion is also the hardest part. So yeah, we have a long mandate ahead of us, and you guys have a lot to do. So thank you so much. To our audience, please remain seated, and I invite on stage Lawrence Cerullos, our editor, to wrap up with our main takeaways. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you for our speakers on the last panel. Last time, I'm Lawrence Cerullos, cybersecurity editor and deputy tech editor at Politico in Europe. I have the pleasure to close our day one of Politico's AI and Tech Summit. It's been a great day, an interesting day. It's been a lot of interesting discussions we've had. If I can just sort of walk through what I think were a couple of takeaways from all of the different speakers we've heard, all of our top-notch thinkers and policymakers on technology. We've heard from some prominent lawmakers that the European Union should focus on picking its targets. It should choose areas where it can win and not try to replicate or emulate where others have beaten us to the punch. That is a powerful message and maybe something to weave into all the work that's going on tech policy right now. We've also heard how Europe's tech regulation will continue to be contentious for a long time to come. Whether it's new industrial policy initiatives to boost European tech, or it's in how we regulate key technologies like large language models, microchips, social media platforms. The EU's set of rule books that it adopted under the last mandate of the European Commission, they are already being challenged. They're being challenged by industry, by civil society, by governments from inside and outside Europe, and not the least by changing technology and how the pace of technology is catching up with regulation. And the way that Europe solves these prickly questions can really define how it positions itself in the world, both economically, diplomatically, politically, geopolitically, and how it stays connected with international partners. That is not only the US. We've talked a lot about the United States in our discussions today. A little less about China, which was a bigger topic, I would say, in the past couple of years. But it is not just about the US and China. It is also about the UK. This morning we've heard from our Politico editor in London that London is trying to position itself in between Brussels and Washington, trying to find a middle way. It is also about partner countries like Japan, and as we've heard from the UN Tech Envoy, it is also about other world regions that too often are forgotten in these conversations. As we talk about tech policy, I think it's a good reminder to keep focused on what's at stake here. And in that sense, we've heard how AI is driving scams and fraud, and that affects European citizens very directly on an everyday basis, and sometimes in devastating ways. We also discussed how to stop the global AI race from destroying the planet in the long run. And that means looking at the energy policies, looking at the sustainability policies that underpin this sector very closely. And lastly, I'm reminded that the UN Tech Envoy pointed out this afternoon that autonomous lethal weapon systems risk racking up the death toll of wars. And that is a very concrete threat that needs government's attention and that no government, presumably, can shy away from. I think these are a couple of very concrete, important ways that we should think about these discussions going forward. I want to thank all of our speakers and moderators that led today's discussions, and I want to thank our crew running this event. I also want to extend our gratitude to our partners for making this summit possible. That includes our leading partners, Accenture and Amazon. It includes our presenting partners, Google, MasterCard, Meta, Microsoft, PPC, Visa, and Zalando, and our visibility partner, Klingendahl Institute. We will continue the conversation tomorrow at 9 in the morning, not too early, not too late either, with a final stream of conversations that is focused on AI and competitiveness. Tomorrow's sessions will include speakers like EU Commissioner for Startups, Research and Innovation, Ekaterina Zarayeva, and AI pioneer Joshua Bengio. You can find the full program on our events page online. Finally, I want to thank you, our audience here in Brussels, joining us online. I found it very engaging. I found it a refreshing day of discussions of the first day of our summit. And I guess that brings me to the final announcement, which is also about refreshments. It's about the happy hour that's about to take place right outside. We are excited to open our happy hour now, which will take place from 5:45 p.m. to 6:45 p.m., just in the space outside. Would love to see you there, and thank you so much for joining us today.